The year was 1887, and the prairie had just begun to wake from winter's long grip. Morning light spilled like molten gold over the rolling sagebrush, each blade tipped with dew that caught the sun in trembling sparks. Caleb Rawlins rode the ridge line at an unhurried pace, the reins loose in one calloused hand, his shirt open to the waist where the warm wind could reach the skin. He was a man built of a land, tall, broad-shouldered, lean with the muscle of work, but his eyes carried the same worn quiet as the hills he crossed. His stallion's hooves drummed over packed earth, the sound carrying in the stillness. Below, the Rawlins spread stretched out, fences cutting lines through the tender green of spring grass, the weathered ranch house standing watch beside the windmill. Caleb's gaze was steady, his mind half on the mending he had left undone the day before, half on nothing at all. That was how he preferred it. No past, no future, just the next chore in front of him. It wasn't until he came around the bend and saw the wagon under the cottonwood that his eyes narrowed. Something was different. The canvas flap was pushed back, the early light falling across the shape of a figure inside. He drew the stallion to a halt, swung down, and crossed the yard with slow, measured steps. She lay curled against a pile of burlap sacks, a threadbare gray shawl pulled tight over her shoulders. Stray strands of chestnut hair spilled across her face, dulled by dust, but still catching glints of auburn in the light. Her cheeks were hollow, her lips pale, her breathing shallow enough he might have thought her asleep for good, except for the faint flicker of her lashes when his shadow crossed her. One arm wrapped instinctively around the soft swell of her belly. The other clutched a crumpled envelope in fingers that were white at the knuckles. Caleb's voice came out low, roughened by disuse. "Who are you, and why are you sleeping here?" Her eyes opened slowly, like someone surfacing from deep water. Hazel, with a glint of gold near the center, they caught his for an instant before slipping away. She pushed herself up, wincing as though every movement hurt. I didn't mean to trespass," she said, her voice trembling but not breaking. "I just needed a place for the night." Her gaze fell to the packed dirt of the yard. "I'm with child." The words hit him like a sudden gust, stealing the breath from his chest. He had learned years ago not to let such things show on his face. He straightened, keeping his tone even. "This isn't the safest place to hide." She didn't answer. The wind teased the edge of her shawl, revealing the faded blue of her dress beneath, torn at the hem and mended in places with mismatched thread. He reached for the canteen at his belt and held it out. "Here." She took it with both hands, drinking in careful sips as though afraid it might be taken back. When she returned it, he handed her a small bundle wrapped in cloth, half a loaf of bread and a slice of venison. Her fingers lingered on the cloth before she unwrapped it, eating with quiet precision, each bite measured. He leaned against the wagon rail, studying her with the same patience he used on a skittish horse. "Where you headed?" Her chewing slowed. She swallowed before answering. "Nowhere certain." "Not much of a plan." His gaze flicked to the envelope in her hand. "What's in the letter?" Her fingers tightened around it. "Something I can't part with." That was answer enough. He'd seen that look before, the look of someone guarding the last thing in the world they had left. "There's work here if you're willing," he said finally. "Better than sleeping in wagons." Her head lifted a fraction, surprise cutting through the wariness in her eyes. "You'd hire me? You don't even know me." "I know you're hungry," he said simply, and walked toward the barn. By mid-morning, she was inside the kitchen, standing at the long counter with a knife in hand. Clara Mae Jensen, who had kept the Rawlins house running since before Caleb was born, stood nearby with her arms crossed. Evelyn, that was the name she had given him, moved carefully, peeling potatoes with a precision that spoke of long hours doing harder work for less kindness. Clara Mae didn't say much, but her eyes never left the younger woman's hands. Caleb kept himself outside, fixing a broken gate latch, but every so often he caught sight of Evelyn through the window. She worked with her head bowed, lips pressed together, only speaking when Clara Mae spoke first. Once she glanced toward the yard, and their eyes met through the glass. She looked away first. That afternoon, he rode into town for nails and feed. He had barely stepped into the store when Jeb Carter's voice cut across the low hum of conversation. Heard Rollins brought home a bride, Jeb drawled, loud enough for every ear. Picked her right out of the roadside ditch. Laughter rolled through the room, tinged with mean curiosity. Caleb said nothing. He gathered what he needed, paid in silence, and walked out. But the words stayed with him like grit under a saddle. When he returned, Evelyn was sweeping the porch. She paused at the sound of his boots on the steps, her eyes searching his face for something he didn't name. He only tipped his hat and went to unload the wagon. That evening, as he repaired a fence post near the corral, she came out with a tin cup of water. She didn't say anything, just held it out. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and for a moment neither moved. Then she turned back toward the house without a word. The days settled into a rhythm. She rose early, her presence as quiet as the light slipping in through the kitchen windows. She worked alongside Clara May without complaint, though she never spoke of where she'd come from or what had driven her to his land. Caleb found himself noticing small things. The way she paused to listen when the meadowlark sang, the careful stitching in her mending, the rare, startled sound of her laugh when Clara May told a story from years past. One evening, after supper, Caleb found her in the kitchen with her head resting on her folded arms. The lamplight softened the sharpness of her features, casting shadows under her lashes. Beside her hand lay the crumpled envelope. He reached to drape a blanket over her shoulders, and the letter slid to the floor. He bent to pick it up, intending to set it aside. But his breath caught when he saw the name written across the front in a hand he knew. His name. The paper was worn thin at the edges, creased from being carried too long. He ran a thumb over the ink, his heart slowing to a heavy, deliberate beat. The sight of his name there felt like the opening of a door he hadn't known was closed. He stood for a long moment in the stillness, the quiet broken only by the ticking of a clock on the wall. Evelyn shifted in her sleep, her fingers curling as if she felt the absence of the letter even in dreams. Caleb slipped it into his pocket, the weight of it far greater than the paper itself. When he stepped outside, the moon was high over the cottonwoods, silvering the yard. Coyotes called in the distance, their voices thin and wild on the wind. Caleb stood with one hand on the rail, the letter pressing against his chest through the fabric of his shirt. He didn't know yet what words it held or why a woman he'd met only days ago carried it. But he knew one thing for certain. When morning came, whatever lay between them would no longer be untouched ground. Something was about to change, and there would be no undoing it. Morning came on soft, the kind of light that turned the prairie into a pale wash of silver and gold. Caleb sat at the kitchen table, the letter laid open before him now, its creases pressed flat by the weight of his hands. Evelyn stood across from him, her shawl wrapped tight as though bracing for a blow. He had woken her just after dawn, his voice quiet but leaving no room for refusal. "This was in your hand the day I found you," he said, the words measured, almost careful. "Why's my name on it?" Her gaze flicked to the letter, then to the floorboards between them. For a long moment, the only sound was the tick of the wall clock and the faint hiss of the kettle on the stove. When she spoke, her voice was steady but low, as if it cost her to say it aloud. "It was from your wife," she said. "She gave it to me years ago." The name struck him like a fist, though she hadn't spoken it. Caleb's throat tightened, but he held her eyes. "You knew her?" "I worked at a boarding house in Abilene," she said, her hands clasping tighter at her waist. "She came through one spring, traveling alone. I was in trouble. The man who ran the place," she stopped, her jaw tightening before she continued. "She stepped in, paid him to let me go. That night she told me if I was ever in danger again, if I had nowhere to turn, I should find you. She gave me that letter. I never thought I'd use it until now." Caleb leaned back, letting the words settle. He could see his wife as she had been, warm, fierce, capable of kindness that cost her something. He'd known she had a way of leaving pieces of herself behind in others, but to have one of those pieces sitting across from him now felt like a door opening onto a past he'd long since sealed. "And now?" he asked. Her eyes met his for the first time since he'd unfolded the paper. "Now I'm here because I couldn't think of anywhere else to go." Something in him shifted at that. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. She had come to his land the way he'd once come to this table after burying his wife, empty-handed, carrying only what little he could keep safe. In the days after, the air between them changed in ways neither named. Caleb found himself lingering in the barn when she came to bring him a fresh rag for the sweat on his brow, watching the way her hair caught the light through the doorway. Evelyn no longer kept herself small in every room. She moved with quiet purpose, her hands steady as she mended harness leather or shelled peas by the kitchen window. Once, they found themselves standing side by side in the yard, watching a storm roll over the far hills. She said nothing, but when the first cool gust touched her cheek, she closed her eyes. He saw her shoulders loosen, as though the wind itself had granted her a moment's reprieve. But word in town was shifting too. Caleb could feel it in the sidelong glances when he walked into the feed store, in the way Clara May hesitated before mentioning errands that might take Evelyn into town alone. The confirmation came one afternoon when Sheriff Amos Tully rode up, dust trailing off his horse like smoke. "You've got a man asking after her," Amos said, reining in by the porch. "Name's Silas Boone. Says she's carrying his child. Says she ran off owing him something." Caleb's hand rested on the porch rail, knuckles widening. "What kind of something?" "His claim is on the child, not money," Amos said. "I'd steer careful if you don't want trouble." Caleb glanced toward the side yard, where Evelyn was hanging laundry. The wind lifted the hem of her dress, but her stance was solid, her back straight. "She stays here," he said, his voice quiet but carved from stone. 2 days later, he found Boone waiting in the saloon. Tall, clean-shaven, his clothes too fine for a man who claimed to work cattle, Boone carried himself like someone who'd never heard the word no, and believed he never would. Caleb stepped up to the bar, his shadow falling over Boone's. "She's mine," Boone said without turning, loud enough to catch the attention of the men at the tables. "Carry my blood. I'll have her back." Caleb's voice was even, but the air around it felt colder. "You'll leave her be." Boone turned then, his smile thin and sharp. "You willing to raise another man's child?" "I'm willing to protect what's under my roof," Caleb said, and the stillness in his tone was more dangerous than any shout. The room held its breath. Boone looked him over, weighing what he saw, and decided to let the moment pass. He tipped his hat with mock courtesy and left without another word. When Caleb came home, Evelyn was at the kitchen table, her hands folded in her lap. She looked up as he entered, searching his face. "I heard he was in town." "He won't trouble you here," Caleb said. Her lips parted, as if she might argue, but she only nodded. "Thank you." That night, after she'd gone to her room, Caleb went to the work shed. He chose a stack of pine boards and began to plane them, the shavings curling onto the floor. The shape of the crib began to take form under his hands, not because she'd asked, but because he couldn't bear the thought of the child she carried arriving without a place made ready. Spring deepened. The cottonwoods put on their bright leaves, the air softening under longer days. Evelyn planted a patch of earth behind the house, coaxing green shoots from the soil. Caleb began bringing her small things from town, a book with worn leather covers, a pouch of dried apricots, a hair ribbon the color of pale sky. She accepted them all with a smile that began in her eyes before it reached her mouth. One evening, with the last light stretching shadows across the yard, she found him mending a section of fence. "I thought you didn't want anyone here," she said, leaning on the rail. "I didn't," he admitted. "Then you showed up." Her head tilted slightly. "And now—" He met her gaze without looking away. "Now I'm wondering what I'd do if you left." The wedding came on a warm afternoon, under the largest cottonwood on the property. Word had spread quickly. Half the town came out, some with genuine smiles, others with curiosity sharp enough to cut. Caleb stood in a black vest, his boots polished, his shoulders square. Evelyn walked toward him in a cream dress Clara May had altered to fit her changing shape, her steps steady despite the eyes on her. The preacher's words were brief. Caleb spoke first, his voice carrying in the stillness. "I didn't plan for this, but I've learned the best things don't come from plans. They come from keeping your word and finding someone worth keeping it for." Evelyn's voice was soft, but no one missed it. "I came here because I had nowhere else to go. I'm staying because I found where I belong." When the vows were done, Caleb took her hands as though anchoring them both. The kiss was brief, but it held the quiet certainty of a man who had chosen without hesitation. After the guests drifted away, they remained under the cottonwood, the blossoms drifting down like slow snow. Caleb's palm rested lightly over her belly. She leaned against him, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the sky burned orange. He thought of the letter, the one that had carried her to his door, and knew he would keep it as long as he drew breath. Trouble might come again. The land might turn against them, as it did to all who worked it. But she had stayed, and so had he. Some loves came like lightning, fierce and blinding, burning themselves out as quickly as they struck. Others came like rain, quiet, steady, sinking deep into the roots of a life until it bloomed in places you thought were long dead. This, he knew, was the second kind. In the warm dusk, with the cottonwoods whispering overhead, Caleb Rawlins understood there was no road that could take him back to the man he had been before. And he didn't want one.